everyone, I'm Ari here with Rachel and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 255 and we're asking, do you need author insurance? Before we start, if you enjoy the show, consider checking out our Ko-fi page. You can follow the page for free as we have plenty of goodies for all. If you're feeling generous, a one-off donation will get you access to more treats, or you could even become a Merry Writer for just $2 a month. For this, you get access to all the items in our shop, including exclusive goodies, as well as access to monthly bonuses, all while helping to support our podcast. If that's not your style, but you still enjoy the podcast, then please do subscribe wherever you're listening if you haven't already, and consider dropping us a like on YouTube. Okay, let's start off with a brief disclaimer. We are not lawyers. We are not insurance experts. Anything we mention here should be checked by yourself, especially because it's different in different countries regarding rules and laws and requirements. So there's our disclaimer. Do not take anything we say as legal expertise.
And on my end, I also am not a lawyer or insurance expert, and I don't even know what we're going to be talking about today. Anyway, this was Ari's episode idea, and she did some research for it, and I am going to be learning along with you guys, so I probably won't have too much to say in this episode. So let's all give Ari the floor. Round of applause for Ari. There we go. Little ASMR for you.
Thanks. I mean, honestly, some of these titles, they come up to us, it's like, yeah, we'll talk about that. And it's like, then we come to it, it's like, oh, should we have talked about this? But hey, I am sure that more than just a few of you would have seen the episode title and been like, what? But hear me out. Here in the Merry Writer podcast, we do sometimes talk about odd episodes. But what we like to do is share things for writers. And while this episode won't be for everyone, and some of you might be going, oh, it's just ridiculous. You never know. Somebody else might be like, ooh, I'm going to look into that. That's why we talk about it. Okay, so back when I used to work at an auditing company, and nope, I was not an auditor, could not be bothered with that kind of job. I used to have to scan documents and reference materials, and I remember finding a whole section on insurance for creative arts. Before that, I didn't even know that was a thing. So obviously, I'd forgotten about it until something came up, and then it popped into my head, and I thought, we're going to talk about that. So let's do it. Let's talk about author insurance. Yes, creatives may need insurance too. This can be to protect you from being sued or for loss of product, loss of earnings, things like that. Now, let's start by saying that it's technically harder to sue fiction authors, apparently, because unless it's a very obvious plagiarism situation, you know, word for word copying, book piracy, things like that, it is harder to prove. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And you can still get sued, even if you are in the right and you've done nothing wrong. People can still bring a claim against you. They might end up losing it, but you still have to pay to fight those cases. So just something to think about. Now, things can get trickier when you start using a person's real name or their likeness, but we're going to talk about that a bit later on. If you're a non-fiction writer, that is different because it's often about real life situations and people. It could be the working relationships or romantic relationships. And this can go for like memoirs and everything. That's when things get murkier and it's apparently easier to be sued. So if you're a non-fiction writer, maybe author insurance is definitely more important for you, depending on what you write.
I actually never really thought about that before, especially for nonfiction. It always confused me when you read like regular fiction novels or again, even nonfiction, and people mention things like certain social media like Facebook or anything like that. And it kind of jars you out of the story for a minute because that's such a real life thing that you're like, oh, how did they do that? Even you think of like fairy tale retellings. Do they have to get like insurance for that? Do they have to get a special copyright for that? Like, how do they borrow those characters and those settings? Like, it's something that always confused me.
It is an interesting thing regarding that. And I'm just going to mention with the copyright regarding fairy tales, it's like certain things have a copyright for a certain length of time. With authors, I believe it's like 100 years with the estate. That's why Beatrix Potter's stuff, I think it's gone past 100 years, and that's why people can reproduce her artwork and some of her things. Fairy tales are from years and years and years ago, so they're like, what's the word? Public domain. Now, obviously, that's very specific. It's like, it's public domain to talk about Cinderella. It is not public domain to use Cinderella likeness from Disney, but we're going to talk about that in a copyright section. So what else was I saying? Rachel sending us on tangents.
Sorry, I derailed the whole conversation because I didn't look at Ari's notes before.
Never do. Okay, so what could you be sued for? Defamation. I think that's one of the bigger ones. And in these cases, it would be liable because it's printed, not spoken. And according to the website Stay Legal, and I quote, it has been asserted that a statement is defamatory when an ordinary, reasonable person, when reading or hearing the statement, thinks less of the person it's being referred to, thinks the person referred to lacks the ability to effectively do their job, shuns or avoids the person referred to, treats the person referred to as a figure of fun or an object of ridicule. In the UK, the Defamation Act of 2013 states that, and I quote, a statement is not defamatory unless its publication has caused or is likely to cause serious harm to the reputation of the claimant, end quote. You don't even need to name them. They just have to be identifiable enough. So you could write, you could be like, I hate my boss. I'm going to write him into my novel. And if you use enough identifiable aspects that other people can identify that person and be like, hey, is that your boss? And it makes them think differently because you did something to that character. You made them do something that you can get sued for. And again, you could get sued and you could win, but you've still been sued. You could still have to pay legal fees and everything. And yes, you might be able to claim them back. But until that win happens, you're paying. So you have to think about things like these sorts of things. It's also why you'll often find at the beginning of a novel or at the end, the beginning or an end of a movie, it'll say things like, any resemblance to anyone living or dead, blah, blah, blah. But that does not actually protect you like you think it does. I've seen people who are like, oh, I put that in. It's like, it protects it. It's like, no. If you're still creating characters based on people and they're still identifiable, that little blurb at the front in your copyright page won't keep you safe. I think it's one of the reasons I've always been a little unsure about people where they're like, oh, I'm going to name, one of my followers, I'm going to name a character after them and kill them off. I always sit there thinking, I hope you're on good terms with that follower all along. Because if you fall out, I don't know. It's murky in my eyes. It's murky.
It is, because this is something that happened to me when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. My friend at the time, she self-published a novel and she based the main character off of herself, and she based the main character's two best friends off of myself and our other friend, and the protagonist murders her two best friends. And she named the characters using our middle names. And I didn't realize, I mean, I was a teenager, so obviously suing her was not in my mind at all. But I remember I thought that because she didn't use myself technically, like even though the character looked exactly like me and had my middle name as her first name, I was like, well, it's not Rachel. So I didn't think anything of it. But people would go on Facebook and be like, oh, wow, I read your book. It's so good. And this character is totally Rachel. This character is totally Christina. And I'm like, I didn't realize that they just have to be identifiable enough. We are no longer friends. That was actually kind of the last straw of why I cut her out of my life. Just quick little caveat. But when she was writing the book, she was showing myself and our other friend, and she just looked at my other friend in the eye and she goes, Rachel was harder to kill because she's my best friend. If I were older and not a teenager, I do wonder what things would have been like if I had the guts to sue her.
First of all, that is creepy as hell. That is creepy as hell.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it was then out for other people, and the fact that, as you said, not only did you know it was you, other people knew. When it's just you yourself, it's still possible to sue someone. But there is that kind of like, am I overreacting? Am I seeing things that aren't there? Because yeah, it can happen. But when other people are like, oh yeah, definitely, it's like, that's such a body, like, ooh, ouch. So yeah, you see, it can happen. So personally, I would recommend never basing characters off people. You can take traits, you can take little bits, but do not base a whole character on somebody you know from your life, your past, even if you've got a good relationship with them, because you don't know how that relationship will be in the future. You just don't. And I also wouldn't do it with fans and readers, again, just because you just don't know. But okay, we're going to move on to the next one. Copyright infringement. According to Wikipedia, copyright infringement is the use of works protected by copyright law without permission for usage where such permission is required, thereby infringing certain exclusive rights granted to the copyright holder, such as the right to reproduce, distribute, display, or perform the protected works, or to make derivative works. This is the reason why writing fan fiction or creating fan art cannot be sold by their creators. Fan art and fan fiction does not meet Fair Use Act unless you get written permission from the original copyright owner, which would be the author or in some cases the publisher. Now, you can create fan art for yourself and fan fiction, although I would always recommend checking out an author's website and the FAQs, because some authors actually just don't want that to happen. And I personally think you should respect their requirements and their wishes. But you can create it for yourself for personal enjoyment. You cannot sell it and you cannot distribute it because it's not your characters. So we're going all the way back to the Disney thing. Disney's image of Cinderella, Disney's image of Winnie the Pooh, because the Winnie the Pooh A.A. Milne characters, they are in the original imagery is in the public domain now. But the Disney design of Winnie the Pooh and Piglet and Eeyore, that's a very specific design, and that is owned by Disney. So you can't go, well, Winnie the Pooh's fine. So even things like that, where once it's been created, and I know an image could be created like that, and seriously, do not mess with Disney. And as someone who runs an Etsy shop, I just want to remind everyone, just because you see other people doing it doesn't make it right. You just have to go into Etsy's forum to see people complain that their listings have been pulled because they were using Disney's imagery, or they were using an author's part of the text and making product using their content, and they got pulled and they got a takedown notice. And then they would come on and say, well, other people are doing it, doesn't matter. Other people rob banks, doesn't make it right, can't do it, just means they haven't got caught yet. So yeah, with copyright, it's not something you could just use. So it's why you've got to be careful if you're using like song lyrics in your book. I think there's a certain number of quotes or a certain line of quotes you can do, or lyrics. I think you're given a bit of grace. Again, do your own research, but you can't put like a whole set of lyrics from a popular song, not even a popular song, a song out there. You can't just put that in your book because they're not your lyrics, they're not your words. You can't put them in a book and then sell them. Another thing to think about, just randomly, the artwork on your book cover. If you create character art with an artist and that artist gives you the art for your book cover, you will probably need to purchase a commercial license to put it on your book cover. Or if you have artwork done by an artist and you want to put it on bookmarks and sell it, you need to make sure you have a commercial license to do it from the artist, and you will probably have to pay. You'll be surprised how many people don't know things like this. So just be aware, because you don't want to get caught. I kind of getting off topic. Why not? Let's move on. This is a very dry episode, very dry and boring.
No, but it's all good information to know. And even like with the copyright thing, it is so bizarre to me because I go on places like Etsy and Redbubble, and you see so many using direct quotes and imagery from all these different books and TV shows and movies. And it's like, how have you not gotten caught yet? That's what I want to know, because it's true. If it's not yours, don't touch it. And if you must poke it, do the research and figure out how you can poke it respectfully. It was a really weird analogy. I apologize.
It works. Well, that's it. I mean, there are some Etsy shops that I follow, and they have literally reached out to some big name authors like Sarah J. Maas and the lady who wrote Fourth Wing. That's it. I can't remember her name. I apologize. I can't remember her name. I haven't read it. That's why I can't remember her name. And they have actually got licenses from them, because if you're an author, you have the right to give commercial licenses out. And what happens is you can say, right, well, I'm going to get 20% or 10% or whatever percentage you want of your sales, but I will give you permission to use quotes from my book or the front cover image. If you own the copyright to that, if you have the right to license that to somebody. So some things on Etsy might be completely legal because the people might actually have the license. If they do, I guarantee it will be listed somewhere. They will say it in their about page. They will say it in their description. They will put it in a picture, because if you have gone out of your way to pay the author for the use of licensing for their work, so you can create merch for them, well, not for them, you can create merch, you want to make sure that everybody's aware of that, and that they have the written permission and a contract that states what they get and how much the author gets. If they haven't written that anywhere, they're probably not doing it legally. And obviously, insurance isn't just about like you getting sued. It means that if someone's selling your work, if someone's using your stuff and you need to go after them, and it might cost you in legal fees or anything, insurance protects you of things. Well, it should do, but you know what insurance is like. So what does insurance cover? That depends on the insurer. That depends on the level of cover. That depends on, how long you've been writing, what sort of products you are protecting. Is it just your written work? Is it the merch you create? Other licensing? Do you have audio books? Do you have anything like that? Obviously, it can be things like legal fees, defense costs, public liability, loss of revenue. You would need to speak to someone about it. Do you have anything else before I go on to my last point?
I was going to answer, but I shook my head instead, and I unmuted myself so I could shake my head.
Rachel shakes her head. Okay, so do you need insurance? That's probably going to come down to the question. That is up to you. Author insurance may not be necessary, and it is another expense, especially if you are just starting out and building your career. If you are further into your career, especially if you are a bigger name, or you've sold more books, or you have a bigger following and a larger amount of sales, it might be something to consider, because usually what happens is the bigger you get, the more people come out of the woodwork to either go after you or steal your shit. Then again, if you are starting to build up your career, it's not a bad thing to have to keep yourself protected, but it's like business insurance. A lot of small businesses don't have business insurance, such as public or product liability, and they may be fined for years, right up until they're not. If you don't get it, make sure you are not copying somebody else's work. Plagiarism is a big no-no. Make sure you're not referencing real people in your fiction story, even friends or family. All it takes is a falling out and boom, somebody may come after you. The best thing is to just be aware of it and make the decision yourself. And I think it's something that a lot of authors aren't even aware of, that there is such a thing as author insurance. So this is just one of those podcasts where we share, yes, you can get author insurance. It is a thing. And with more and more stories appearing online and people stealing them and pirating books from authors, maybe just having some coverage to protect yourself isn't the worst thing. It is another cost, as in with any industry. You need to do your research. You need to consider the risks versus the reward and the cost and make your own choices. It might be something you don't want to do now, but you want to do it later. Might be something you look into and think, wow, it's not actually that expensive. Maybe I'll protect myself. Especially if you've already been like pirated or something, maybe you will find it useful. I don't know. In the end, it's just something you might not have known about, and now you do. I'm just going to make a quick point. I am not sure what happens regarding traditional publishing. My guess is they will have some form of insurance in case they're sued, because obviously the rights and everything get changed. But I'm not sure if they expect authors to also have insurance for like personal protection, you know, like because someone could sue the publisher because of the book, but could someone sue the author themselves? Now, whether would the publishing company help them out, or would the publishing company cut them adrift? I don't know. It's just something that came into my head you might want to think about. In the end, it's just more information in your back pocket is not a bad thing. Even if you go, yeah, you know what, it's not for me, at least you know. Okay, before we leave, if you want to learn more about us, the podcast, and opportunities to be a guest on the show, don't forget to check out our website at themirrorwriterpodcast.podbean.com. Now we're going to turn it over to you guys. Do you have, or would you ever consider author insurance? Or did you even know that was a thing? Or have we just like blown your mind with this knowledge? Let us know your answers in the comments so we can chat. Remember, we release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing what's the next topic? Remember, we release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing the many hats that indie authors wear. To ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. As always, thanks for listening to the Mirror Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by... What is the fucking brought to us by? Oh my god! Is it the same as last time? We were doing so good with the timing and everything. Right, start again. This podcast is brought to you by Writing Distractions. We're stalling on our whips. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.